Of the first Southwest Fox in 4 years. So hopefully we're all pumped up to get together and to learn some stuff. This session is called Advanced Reporting with Microsoft Excel. And by advanced reporting, I don't mean like we're going to do some super advanced things in Excel, but advanced beyond, the kind of reports maybe we're used to generating in VFP for sure. My name is Doug Henning. I'm a partner with Stonefield Software in Canada. The next two slides basically are just a long way of saying I've been around for a really long time and I've done a bunch of stuff. So I'm sure everybody's aware that Excel is widely used for reporting. I mean, I think initially Excel was used as a simple spreadsheets, but a lot of people today use it as a database. But especially use it for lots and lots of reporting stuff. One of the nice things is that it's really easy to add Excel export to any VFP application, and that's what we're going to spend the first half of the session looking at, is different ways that you can send output to Excel documents. But then we're going to take those documents and make them look better than just a simple old boring list. We're going to do some nice stuff. We're going to actually make some presentation style data with the stuff that we get out of Excel. So there are a variety of ways that you can send VFP data to Excel. We're going to take a look at each of these. I want to point out that the one at the bottom, though, template based. So sorry for it's hard to read, hard for those of you in the back to read the slide. But so by template based approach, I mean we're not going to generate a new document. We are going to update an existing document. Pretty much the majority of these mechanisms would create a new document, but we want to take a look at another approach to update an existing one when the data changes. So we'll start off with the simple ones that I'm sure that you're all familiar with. So it'll really just be kind of a refresher more than anything else. So the copy to command, there's XLS, the ones that are specific for Excel output or something that Excel can read would be the XLS, XL5, CSV, and delimited. And the latter two are really only different because one of them outputs the column header names, the other one doesn't. And it's also what the default file name, the file extension is for them. So the pros for copy to are that it's fast, it's a single line of code, and you don't have to have Excel installed to create the file. Obviously, and when I say that for this and other examples, I mean to generate the file. Obviously, you have to have it to open the file in Excel, but you don't have to have Excel installed on the machine. So this would work fine on a server, for example, that doesn't have Excel installed on it, and somehow you get the file to a workstation where the user does have Excel, and they would open the document there. The downsides are that these are old formats. I mean, maybe not so much the Excel or the CSV and delimited, but for sure the XLS and the XL5 are old formats. You only have a maximum of 65,535 rows. Even though Excel can read, millions and millions of rows, these formats only support the XLS and XL5 only support outputting that many rows. Memo fields are not supported. There's no formatting. Values may be misinterpreted or undesirable. And I'll show you an example of what I mean by that in a moment. And there's no support for templates. And by templates, I mean, again, we want to update an existing document or an existing template. In this case, copy to would generate a brand new file. And so we wouldn't have the ability to do that. So let's go and take a look at some code. Where's my VFP window? All right, so let's just take a look at this real quick. We're going to output to a CSV, a delimited, and you notice that I have to specify an extension for delimited because the default extension would be TXT. So I specify CSV as the extension, and an XLS and an XL5. And then let's change the date format to British format, and let's output to a CSV and then change it back again. And then we're going to open all those documents and see what they look like. So let's just run this code. And while we're waiting for the Excel to open, here's what let's go and do that. Let's go and take a look back at that browse window. So we've got a text column. Sorry, this is jumping up in front of me here. We've got a text column. Okay, let's go back to here again. Text column, we have another text column. Although you might notice something funny about this value here. Even though it's text, it kind of looks like a numeric value, maybe from one perspective. 10E, like a scientific notation, 05. And I didn't just make this up, by the way. I actually had a customer who was outputting to CSV, and they said, I'm getting, instead of this part number, I'm getting this, really weird, like 1.0 times 10 to the 7th. Like, what the heck is that? Well, it's because their part number looked like that value there, which Excel misinterpreted. We have a date, including a blank date. We have a logical, and we have a memo field. If we take a look at what we got in Excel, so this is the CSV here. Oh, sorry. Yep. There we go. So here's our text column. And by the way, when I said no formatting, one of the things you don't get, of course, is column widths automatically adjusted. So here's our text column. Here's what I mean by that scientific notation. This was a text column 10E06, and yet Excel misinterpreted that as scientific notation and thinks it's a numeric value. We have a date here, except it doesn't really handle blank dates properly. This is a character field with a slash and a couple of spaces and a slash. And these are not logical values. This is the letter T and the letter F. So we're not maybe necessarily interpreting the values properly. So that was the CSV. This one was the tech. Yeah, I'll bump it up. This one was the delimited, and it's pretty much exactly the same. The only difference between the two was that this one has column headings and this one doesn't. This was the XLS format, and I wish it would save it for me, but it won't. And you'll notice that now one benefit here is that it did interpret this value properly. It did interpret the date properly, not just some string value, except the blank date is coming out as a string. And it did interpret the logical fields properly as true and false values. Except one problem with the XLS format. You notice this warning here. I can't modify this file unless, I have to go into and change my Excel settings to be able to modify an XLS file generated with this technique. So using type XLS is really not a good idea because you can't do much with it. This is the XL5 one instead. And this one does look a little better. Again, so we have that character string is fine. It did interpret this properly. It did interpret the date properly, except for the blank date, it didn't. And we do have true and false values. And this last one was a British date. And you'll notice that this is actually just a character string because it really couldn't parse it. It didn't understand that it was day, month, year. And so this is just a character string 17/06, blah, blah, blah. And again, we have misinterpreted here, and we have no logicals there. And we have no memo field output as well. Oops, not save. Oh, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Don't save. Don't save. Don't save. Try that again. Close. Don't save. Oh, yeah, I got to close them all. Okay. Close all tabs. Don't save. Don't save. There we go. All right. Any questions? Yes. Nulls are not really treated very well either. But we'll get to some formats that do support it better. Tomorrow, any questions? Okay. All right, CSV processor. This is a VFPX project from Antonio Lopes, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Lopez. This is actually a pretty cool project. It gives you much better control over both importing and exporting CSV files into VFP applications. I use it actually for not so much for the export part, but for the import part, where you need to be able to say, well, this is a date column, even though it doesn't look like it, and this is a numeric column, even though it might look like character, that kind of thing. Dates, for example, are output as year, month, day, and so they are treated properly in Excel. Logicals are output as true and false values, so they're treated properly in Excel, and memo fields are supported. So let's go and take a look at an example of that. So we're going to set path to the folder where I've got that installed. We're going to do CSV so it can do a set procedure itself. And then I just simply instantiate the CSV processor class. If I want a header row, it's actually turned on by default. If I don't want a header row, then I would set the header row property to false, and then I don't get column headings in that first row. I tell it that I want logical values to be output as true for true values and false for false values. And then I'm going to call the export method to go and output to that document, or to that CSV file. So let's go and run this. And here's our Excel document, and let's bump that up. Okay, so we see that we still have a problem with misinterpreting this value here, but the date is, the blank date is properly read. So the dates are treated properly. We actually have true and false, actual true and false values for logicals, and we have a memo now, which we did not have before. So CSV processor gives you much better control over both import and export to CSV files. So not Excel, but CSV. Where my mouse go? There it is. Oh, you know what? I'm going to turn this light off. There we go. All right. Any questions about that? Yes.
Is that project in VFPX?
The question was, is that project in VFPX? Yes, it is. So if you go to VFPX.org, click on projects to see the project list, you'll find CSV processor right there in the list, and that'll take you to the site where you can download it, and documentation is there, and so on. Any other questions? Tamar, any questions? No? Okay. Next one, grid extras. This is from Craig Boyd. Now, I think the last time I looked a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure that his site is still up anymore. I'm not sure if it was a temporary glitch or if it's just gone off the internet, but it is available in the samples that are included with this session. So if you don't already have grid extras, you can download it from the FTP site. So grid extras is a really cool little tool. It provides extra functionality to your VFP grids, and there's almost no work necessary. You drop it on a form, you tell it which grid this thing is bound to, and boom, it just gives you new features to a grid. For example, you can hide and when I say you, the user can hide and show columns, they can rearrange columns, they can search, they can filter, they can do all kinds of cool things. What concerns us today is that it also has Excel output. And it respects the visible columns. You still don't have any formatting, but it does respect, if the user said, I want to hide 3 or 4 columns, it respects which columns are visible to the user when it outputs that Excel document. Now, this mechanism does require that Excel be installed on the machine in order to create the file, and it has one other requirement. You have to have the Microsoft Access Data Engine installed, which is not installed by default on somebody's machine. So you'd actually have to go and either download it from the Microsoft website and install it, or include it as part of your application's installer in order to be able to use this to output to Excel. And the reason for that is because it actually, and we'll see the code for this in a moment or so, it uses OLADB and a cursor adapter to write to an Excel database, right? As if it was a database, it's going to write to an Excel table, which is really one of the worksheets. So that's the mechanism that it uses to do that its thing. So let's go here to this form. And I realize it's kind of tiny, but we're not really concerned about the contents of it. So you can see there's, well, maybe a little bit hard to see, but in the bottom right-hand corner is this little icon here. That is sort of a visual indication that grid extras is turned on. And we have several capabilities. We can right-click a column, and then we can search or filter. We can export to Excel. We can turn on or hide or show additional columns. But like I said, the thing that we're interested in now is Excel export. So we'll click that. We'll specify a file. Let it do its thing. Yes, we would like it opened. And here is the result. Let me bump that up. And so again, it's not really formatting the column widths or things like that, but you can see that it did output to Excel. And I'm not outputting the same table I did earlier, so we're not seeing that, the true and false and memo and so on. It's just sort of like a customer table from Excel, or from a VFP customer table. But you can see that it did create that Excel document for us. Like I said, not perfect, but it's built in. So if you want your users to be able to output to Excel, you don't have to lift a finger other than implementing grid extras, which, like I said, is just super simple to do. Any question? Yes, go ahead.
Just a pointer, if people are using grid extras, when you did the Excel export, you can actually change the file type to xlsx.
Okay, so the comment,
the security issue of an XLS file.
Okay, so the comment from Richard was you can change the output to an xlsx file rather than an XLS file. Let's go and take a look at how. Oh, sorry.
I think going back to CSV processor,
Okay.
somebody asked, could you show the CSV file?
Oh, sure.
The result.
Yes. So the question was, can we see the CSV file? So let's go and find it. It was in here, and it was, which file? Oh, sorry. No, I saved it in here. Sorry. And it was, I think it was 6, I think was the file. Yes, here it is here. So here is where the memo was output, for example. And you can see here's our date output as a year, month, day, and here's our true and false, our logical true and false values output. Okay, so back to grid extras. Just wanted to show you the code here. I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see that this method that does the Excel output, it creates an ADO-DB connection object, connects to Excel, and this connection string is why you have to have that Microsoft Data Engine installed. It's using an OLEDB provider that is not installed by default on the user's machine. And then it goes and, you know, drops that first sheet and builds a SQL statement, and then creates I won't show you the code, but it creates a cursor adapter using ADO as the data source mechanism, and connects to that spreadsheet, and then talks and, you know, sends the data that way. So kind of an interesting technique, but not one that we're going to explore in any further detail. Any questions about grid extras? Yes. So the question was, if you're not going to export to Excel, then yes, you do not require that Access OLEDB provider. Tomorrow, any questions?
No.
Okay. All right, XFRX. This is a reporting add-on from a company in what used to be called Czech Republic. I believe they now call it Czechia. It's from a company called Equius. It's a great product. In fact, it's sort of one of the core pieces of our product, Stonefield Query. It has a customizable preview window, which goes way beyond the capabilities of the FoxPro preview window. And it has output to lots of different file types, PDF and PNG and Word and Excel and so on. It uses a report listener, so it works with any FRX. You don't have to make any changes to your report whatsoever. You just instantiate a report listener and use that in your report form command. When it comes to Excel specific output, it has a couple of different mechanisms. One is native PF_XLSX. That term is used because that's the string that you tell it when you say what format you want. It does not require Excel to be installed, and it generates a file that looks almost identical to what your report looked like when you previewed it or printed it. It also has, this is fairly new, this is something that was just added in the last year, I think, a method called XFRX copy to XLS cursor. So you don't even have to have a report now. You can just output a cursor directly to Excel. And it has some benefits over the other mechanisms that we've seen so far. So let's go and take a look at XFRX. So here we're going to set class lib to the report listener. This is just the one that comes with VFP, the FFC one. And we're going to, here, let's go and run the report so you can see what it's going to look like. Then we're going to create an XFRX report listener object using this one line of code. Then we basically set some properties. So we want to output to this document here. We want to use this format, and there's a bunch of other parameters you can pass as well. And then we're going to run that report, but use that report listener. So it's not going to preview anything. It's going to generate an Excel document. Then we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to generate a different one using the other format that's supported. And again, just run the report, and then we'll open those two Excel documents and see what they look like. So let's go and run that. Here's what the report looks like. And again, this is kind of tiny, but it's really just to give you an idea of, what my FRX layout looks like. I've got a red report heading, and I've got lines for my column headings, and I've got a certain font and size and so on. And then we're going to output to Excel, and it'll open those up as soon as the output is finished. And I'll take a drink while I'm waiting. Okay, so here is our output. This is the first one, that first format. And you notice it looks almost identical to the FRX layout. Same font size. We see our column headings in bold and our lines above and below. Oh, sorry. And we've got our red report heading and so on. Now, the one thing about this format is that it's done almost exactly like the preview. So that means we have a page break, even though it maybe doesn't make sense in an Excel document, because that's almost certainly, if I print this, not where the page break is going to be. But because this is the way the report was output, that's why we have what looks like a page break here with the new page header. The other format doesn't do that. It just outputs it as one long Excel document. So no pagination for that. And you'll notice that it uses sort of a bit of a trick, and that it uses different sizes of column widths and row heights in order to make that report layout look like the preview did. And in some cases, if you have a lot of, you might see some columns that are 1 or 2 or 3 pixels wide, and you might have 20 of them, you know, in between columns to make it look exactly like the report should look. As a result, the output isn't maybe necessarily, I mean, it's nice looking, but it's maybe not that useful if you want to maybe add some calculations to it, because of all these, you know, these extra columns added because of that. Now there is another mechanism, that's that other method I mentioned. So here we don't have a report at all. We're just going to create this document. I'm seeing, oh, never mind, there it is. Okay, so here is our document output. Excuse me. Here's our VFP table output as an Excel document. And if I recall, I think it supports memos, and it does support data types, and it supports true or false and things like that. I don't have any examples of those in this in the table I used, but it pretty much gives you a nice looking out, kind of just boring data, but it does give you better output maybe than some of the other formats that we saw. Any questions about XFRX? No? All right, Excel automation. This is pretty straightforward. You instantiate the Excel.application object, and now you are talking to Excel as a COM object. So the pros are that you have full access to the entire Excel object model. It has IntelliSense support, as you can see in my little screenshot over at the right there. And it does support a template-based approach, because you can instantiate Excel, tell it to open an existing document, and change the values of certain cells based on the data that exists in the table now. Excuse me. The downside is that it does require Excel to be installed, because we're going to instantiate it as a COM object. It's slow. COM automation is slow. And so if you have a lot of work that you're doing, it's going to take a while to run. It also requires lots of code, because you have to tell it every single thing you want to do. If you want to output to A1, you've got at least one line of code to output to A1. You want to output to A2, it's at least one line of code to output to A2, and so on. Every single cell is a manual thing. And then there's setting formats and fonts and formulas and all that jazz. So it's going to be lots of code you'll have to write. And you'll also have to learn the API, right? You'll have to learn what methods you call and what and how to use them. And I'll take questions in just a second. And the code has to change when the output changes, right? So in other words, if the user takes a look at your spreadsheet that you created and says, oh, you know what, I really want the customer name to be in the 3rd column, not the 2nd column. Now you have to go and change your code. So everything that output to column 2, you have to rearrange that code or add new code or take, you know what I mean? You have to write some stuff. Okay, now there are a couple of questions. I think you first.
Another con, which is I ran into over the years, when someone upgrades Microsoft Office, it sometimes breaks.
Oh, so the comment from Alan was that sometimes when you upgrade Microsoft Office, it can break your Excel automation code. Good point. And Dave?
2 things. One, I don't know if it's still true, but it used to be Excel, like a student version, wouldn't support automation. But then also the fact Visual Box Pro requires a 32-bit.
Good. Yeah. Good point. So a couple comments there were that if somebody has a version, there are some versions of Excel that don't support COM automation, like maybe the student version, and also that they have to have the 32-bit version of Excel installed, not the 64-bit version. I think there was another, yes, Lutz.
one, it's a little bit of tricky programming.
Yes, and we'll see some examples. So the comment was, if you have to fill a lot of fields, it can take some tricky programming, and we're going to see some examples of some I think, well, a little bit of some tricky programming. Yes.
And Charles asks, which of these, if any, do we have to pay for? Free.
Which of these of any?
Which of these are free and which do you have to pay for? Of the things you're showing.
Oh,
Repeat the question.
so the question was, which of these things are free and which you have to pay for? The only thing that you'd have to pay for would be the XFRX that I showed. Everything else is free. Was there another question? No? All right, so let's go and take a look at some code. Oops. So we're going to create a cursor here from one of the Northwind, from a couple of the well, actually a bunch of the Northwind tables. And then here's a really fast way to create that Excel document before we automate it. We're going to use that copy to mechanism that we saw a moment ago to initially create our Excel document. But now we want to create a pivot table. So I'm going to define an array with a few columns. Then I'm going to call this create pivot table program here. And let's just take a look at that. Oops. And so here's going to be a little bit of tricky code. So here we're going to instantiate the Excel.application object. We're then going to go and open that XLS document that we just created using the copy to command. And now we're going to go and do a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to create a new worksheet. I'm going to call it pivot table. We're going to select the range, and then we're going to call this pivot table wizard method to generate a pivot table. Now, how did I know this? Well, A, I read Tamara Ndella's book on office automation, but B, I also went and turned on macros, did a bunch of stuff in Excel, and then looked at the code it generated, and then translated the VFP script into Fox Pro code. So it can be a little tricky to do office automation. But anyway, so this is going to generate a pivot table, but it's just a pivot table without any definition yet. Now we have to go and tell it, okay, here's my pivot fields. So we're going to go through each of the columns, and we're going to say whether it's a data field or a row field or a column field, again, using automation. And then finally, we're going to save the document and get out of Excel. So let's go and run that. And we'll notice this one probably takes a little bit longer to run than maybe the other ones. Actually, not too bad. So, and let's bump that up so we can see it. And here's that Excel pivot table that we created. Let's just make these columns a little wider. So this tab has the data that was created initially. So copy to, I created a cursor, then I did copy to, that created this. Then I went and opened that document, created a new worksheet, put a pivot table on it that was bound to that data, and then said, okay, this field goes in the rows, this field goes in the columns, this field goes in the data area. So with automation, I generated this document from scratch, although it could have been an existing document that I simply updated the data part, and then the pivot table got refreshed. Any questions about Excel automation? All right, Workbook XLSX. This is another VFPX project. This one's from Greg Green. So again, you can go to vfpx.org, go to projects. You'll find this in the project list. This is such a cool tool. I use it in pretty much every VFP application I write because it allows you to not just generate some boring old list of data, but you have full control over what that data looks like. And so you can make it look any way you want to. Some of the features of Workbook XLSX are that it writes directly to the XLS file. I'm not sure if everybody here knows this, but an XLS file is actually a zip file of XML documents. There's a bunch of XML documents that define what that Excel file looks like. They're zipped up, and the zip file just has an XLSX extension rather than a zip extension, but it's still a zip file when it comes down to it. So what Greg's tool does, he writes those XML files out, zips them up, gives them an XLS extension, and so you don't have to have Excel installed on your machine. It can read from documents, it can save or save as, it can write the documents, you can kind of do whatever you need to do. You can assign values and formats to cells, you can set column widths, you can merge cells, you can do, most of the things that you might do with Excel automation or manually or visually in Excel tool, but you can do programmatically using this product, this tool. It's a single class, VFPX Workbook XLSX. You either drop it on a form or instantiate it in code, and then you call methods. It has a couple of methods that I use a lot to generate a document directly from a cursor or a grid. So one line of code, other than the instantiation of the class, obviously, but one line of code to create an Excel document from a cursor or from a grid. If you have to do more fancy things like, manually output certain cells, then of course you'll have to write some code to do that. But with these two methods, you can do a lot of the work maybe. So you can generate pretty much anything that you want to using this. Pros, it does not require Excel to be installed because it generates those XML files and zips them up automatically. You can use a template-based approach. So in other words, you take an existing document and your code opens the document, makes whatever changes to it, and saves it again. So as the data gets refreshed, as new sales are made, you go and you go and update an existing document rather than generating new from scratch. It's faster than Excel automation because it's not using COM. It writes directly to XML documents, which FoxPro is very fast at doing text writes. And as I mentioned, there's a single method call to output from a cursor or a grid, if that's what you want to do. Oops. The cons are that, like the Excel automation approach, there can be a lot of code you may have to write if you want to go and do a bunch of stuff. And we'll see an example of that in a moment. It doesn't provide full access to the Excel object model. It just, whatever methods Greg has implemented, those are the ones that are available to you. He's adding more all the time, but if you have to do something that's, maybe a little arcane, he may not have written a method for it yet. So there's lots of methods. The very complete documentation, it's a PDF file, but very complete documentation, but there's lots of methods and properties that you might have to learn. And similar to what I mentioned with the Excel mechanism, if the output has to change, then the code has to change. If the user says, I need this to be bold and this to be in red, then you have to change the code that output that to be bold and red and so on. So let's go and take a look at an example of that. This one is going to be our one line of code approach. So we're going to instantiate the workbook, VFPX WorkbookXLSX class, and then we're going to call one line of code to save a table to a workbook. So we're going to save our customers table to this document, and then we're going to take a slightly different approach to it. Same method, but now we're going to pass it more parameters. And the difference is this one is going to give us just a straight Excel document. This one's going to give us a table, and we'll talk about tables in a bit. So let's run this. And this just outputted a couple of files, and it'll open them up in a moment. And here they are, and let's just bump that font up. Okay, so here's our document. Again, pretty straightforward. It's just a list. We're not doing anything fancy just yet. Here's the same thing, but with that second method call, in which case I told it to generate a table. And you'll notice that it's got some nice format. The column widths are already, the column widths are properly set where they weren't here. And it's a nice font and certain colors and stuff. We're going to talk about Excel tables in more detail later on, but this is an Excel table now, not just an Excel document. Another mechanism that you can use, let's close all tabs. Another way that you can do it, let's go here to this one we saw before. So this is that grid that we had. And when we click on the Excel button, we're going to, again, instantiate that object. We're going to set some properties, a creator name, a company name. We're going to tell it to save currency as numeric. And then we're going to call save grid to workbook to take a FoxPro grid and output it to an Excel document. And the nice thing about that is that it respects the fonts and the font sizes and the column widths and colors and all kinds of things like that. So let's go and run this form. And you'll notice that because of dynamic row coloring, some rows are in red and some are in yellow and so on. So let's go and output this to Excel. Excuse me. And here is the resulting output. And you'll notice that it respected the font and the font size. It respected the dynamic back color. And it even did something nice for us. It put a lock or a freeze on row 1 so I can scroll and yet still see the column headings. Okay, so that was all one line of code to generate this Excel document. So very, very nice. Oops. And let's go and take a look at a more complicated example, this one here. So now we want to get a little bit fancier. We've been generating, for the most part, just boring lists of data. Well, we can do that with Foxborough reports too. We can generate something that looks kind of boring. Let's generate something maybe a little bit nicer looking. Now, this is going to be the lots of code case though. So here we're going to go and create a cursor with some shipping data, instantiate the object. We're going to create a workbook, and then we're going to add a sheet to it with the name of shipping. And now comes the code. So we're going to set the column widths for, so this is what this returns when you create a workbook is it returns a numeric value, sort of like a handle. You know, if you've used, lots of places in VFP will return a handle, like an ODBC handle, for example, and this returns a handle. So we're going to say, set the column width for workbook number 1, sheet number 1, row number 1. We want to set that to 29 pixels wide or 8 pixels wide or 18 and so on. So we're going to set some column widths. We're going to then define some styles. So, and a style can have borders and fonts and font sizes and fills and alignments and other things. So you have these different methods. You can create a style and then give it different kinds of formats. So we're going to create a style for headings and a style for left aligned headings and right aligned headings and regular left and regular int values and regular currency values. So I'm going to define a style for all the different kinds of things that I want, rather than having to go into every cell and say, okay, you're bold and left justified and this font and this size. I'm going to apply styles like you would in Word. You use a style sheet to save having to format every single cell the same way. Okay, so now let's put in our heading, our headers. So I'm going to set cell value. So row 1, column 1 is going to be shipping list. And then I'm going to apply a style to that. And then I'm going to put in the date in row 2. And then I'm going to set a style for that. And then I'm going to put in some column headings across a row and set some styles for that. Then I'm going to merge a couple of cells together because I want to have like one big block of text rather than 5 individual cells. Now I'm going to output my record. So I'm going to have a scan statement, and I'm going to put, you call set cell value to output to the current row, column 1, the value, the company name, and column 2, the order ID, and so on. And then I'm going to accumulate some totals. And after I'm done my scan loop, I'm going to output those totals to a totals row in that spreadsheet, and then set the style for those cells as well. And then finally at the end here, we're going to save that workbook. Okay, so let's run this. Well, there was a bunch of code there because I pretty much had to tell. But now we have a much more attractive looking report. It's not just a boring old list of data. Now we've got these two here span 6 columns, and they're big text in white background, blue background, white text, big bold fonts. And here I've got a gray background for my column headings and bold and a certain font and size. And so here's all my shipping data, and here are my totals row. So a much more attractive and useful report. It just took some code to write it. But Workbook XLSX allows you to write that code. Any questions about that? Yes.
On your totals row, can you give it a formula for Excel instead of you summing it up on the block side?
So the question was, can I put in a formula rather than, because I accumulated those values myself and then stuff the values in here, and you can see it's a hard-coded value. But the answer is yes. You can put a formula into the cell to say sum up from D1 to D28 automatically. So yes, the answer is yes. You can put in your own formulas. Yes. Can it do pivot tables? Yes, it can. And certainly if it doesn't, I'm not sure if it supports graphs. If it doesn't, Greg has been really good about, you post it's on GitHub. So you simply create an issue, say, it would be so nice if you could support charts. And he's pretty good about adding stuff that people ask for. So yes.
Where are the styles defined?
So those styles were defined right in code right here. So I said, create a format style, and it gives you a handle. And then I said, okay, now let's add some borders to that style. I want to have a left, a right, a top, and a bottom border. And then let's set the font. I want it to be Calibri 14 and this background color or this foreground color. And then I want to do a fill of this particular color. And I want to do a horizontal alignment or a vertical alignment and so on. So these 5 lines of code created one style. And then these ones created another style. Then to apply those styles, I said here, set style range, set cell style range. And it is a range. So I'm basically going from this workbook in row 1, I want to go from columns 1 to 6. I want all 6 columns formatted using this style. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, good question. Good question. Yeah. So the syntax, you notice I'm saying border left, border right. These are actually constants that are defined in this include file right here. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? And same thing with here. Cell this alignment one as well. Yes.
Have you seen significant performance differences in terms of writing versus reading XLSX files, and how well does this scale as you work with larger results?
Good question. So have I seen other performance issues with writing to these XLS documents? And the answer was there originally was, but not for a reason you might think. When I first started using it, you know, I used it with 50, 100, 200 record tables, and it worked great. And then I had a customer try it with, like, I don't know, 500,000 rows, and it took, I don't know, 20 minutes to generate. So I traced through the code and found out that it was a really odd thing. It's the set point to command that was slowing things down. Greg was saving certain settings like set decimal, set point, you know, a bunch of things, setting them to the way that Excel would need them, then doing the output. The set point to command executed 500,000 times, took of that 20 minutes, 19 and a half were executing that one line of code. Thank you, set coverage profiler. And so he simply changed the code, he wrapped it. If the point is already set to a decimal, there's no need for us to change it, which unfortunately means that people outside of North America are going to take that performance hit, because it would have to change. You know, if in Germany, for example, they use what we would call a comma as their decimal separator. So, but Excel doesn't like that, and so it has to change the point to a comma. Now the performance hit kicks in. So it depends on what your machine uses for things like point and decimal, and I think currency, and some of the other things that he's changing. And it turns out that those are fairly slow to change in VFP. So your mileage may vary. It works nice and fast for North American audiences, maybe less so for others. And I haven't tried it, so I can't say, but I'm guessing it would be slower. Yes. So the comment was, wouldn't it just be slow because of set point? Well, yes, but he's wrapped set point now. So like I said, he says, if set point is not equal to a decimal, then we have to change it to a decimal. And in North America, it probably already is. So that code got skipped over.
Yeah, but you just do it once. And normally a set point, the change of set point is only slow if you display a lot of.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So I think so. Luther's comment was that you probably only have to do it once, and I believe that that's the case now. I think when he first wrote it, he was doing it on every cell value. Now, if I recall, he does it at the I was going to say, in that case, yeah.
I can have my questions. What about reading files?
Reading files. So reading files, the XML files, is I guess it depends on the size of the file. I haven't made it read really large files. It definitely, I think, would be a performance issue, because those XML documents have to be parsed, and cursors created internally. He's using cursors. He's writing to cursors, and when he's done, he outputs the cursors to XML documents in the format that Excel requires. To do the opposite, he'd have to read those XML documents in, parse them, and create cursors from them. So I haven't tried it with large documents. You'd have to try it yourself and see what kind of performance issue you'd have. Yeah. I mean, one more question, we probably should move on. So
do we get the format back if we read information?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Do we get the format back or just the data?
The question is, do you get the format back? And yes, you get everything back, not just the data. You get everything back, fonts and font sizes and colors and borders and everything. You get it all back. All right, so let's move on. Oops, let me close this. All right, so now let's talk about template-based reporting. The idea here is that rather than generating an Excel document from scratch every time, which maybe isn't necessary. I mean, the data changes, but does the format really change? The customer probably wants the report to look the same every time, just with fresh data. So we maybe don't have to generate that Excel document every time. So the idea of template-based reporting is that we are going to output to an Excel document where one of the pages contains the raw data from VFP. And when I say raw data, I don't necessarily mean, you know, every single customer, every single record. It could be a cursor, a summarized cursor. It's whatever you want it to be, but it contains the data that then we will then display nicely in other Excel worksheets in that same document. The source of the data is either going to be CSV or XML that was generated from VFP. You could output to Excel and then use that as the source of your data. I just like working with CSV and XML because it's fast and easy, and Excel doesn't care, right? So if it's easy to generate XML and more difficult to generate an Excel document that's used as the source for the data, then why not take the easiest approach, right? And then what we're going to do when the data changes, we simply refresh the document. We don't regenerate the document at all. All we do is we regenerate the XML file or the CSV file. And when that Excel document gets opened, the user either manually, or we'll talk about later on, automatically refreshing the Excel document. So the Excel document doesn't get touched. You just simply output fresh XML data. And we know how to do that in VFP, easy peasy and really fast, right? So that's the approach we're going to take for the rest of the session. So the pros for this mechanism are, you don't have to code the document generation. All you're doing is outputting to an XML file. That's all you're doing. You create a cursor, you output to XML, you're done. That's all the VFP code has to do. It's fast because XML generation is fast. You don't need Excel installed because you're just generating XML. And in my mind, this is the best part right here. I don't have to create the Excel document at all. I mean, I know Excel probably as well as any programmer knows Excel, but certainly not as well as some Excel jockeys out there do, right? I mean, these guys are doing the what if analysis and they know Excel like 10 times better than I do. And that's great. All I have to do is give them an Excel document, an XML document, show them how to, do something with it. Maybe I even create the starting document for them and then let them go to town. Make it do whatever you want. Go crazy with pivot tables and dashboards and all kinds of cool stuff. And I don't have to know how it works. All I have to do is give them the document and let their best people figure out how to display the data the way they want. And part B of that is that if they need changes to the layout, they don't even have to give me a call because the data hasn't changed. They decide to create a new pivot table based on the data. Go ahead, create a new worksheet, create a new pivot table. Don't call me. I don't have anything to do with that part of it. Now, if you need some new columns to support that, great. I'll change the output and I'll give you a different XML file, but I don't have to touch that Excel file at all. The con isn't really a con. I just threw it on there for balance, so I could say there are no cons at all. The only con is that, you have to create the XML document before you can create the Excel document. So like I said, you can't just have the Excel jockey can't just start working from scratch. They have to have something to start from. And so you have to give them that Excel document. Maybe you give them you give them the XML document. Maybe you give them a starting Excel document with the XML data already read in for them, and then they take it from there. Okay, so that's all there is to that. All right, so let's go through this step by step. So step one is generating that data file. You can either use CSV or XML. I recommend XML because, as we saw earlier, there are times when Excel doesn't necessarily interpret values in CSV properly. So, but if we give it XML, XML can have a schema in it, and then Excel will know exactly what to do with that data. So XML is going to be our preferred output. And it's super easy to create. You create your cursor, right, that has whatever you need to do to have that data, and you use cursor.xml. Pow, done, right? There's my XML document. And you can either run it from an automated task, right? At midnight every day, this little VFP code runs and generates the XML file. Or maybe it's every hour if it's, we're talking about fast changing data. Maybe every hour that Excel document is regenerated and those spreadsheets can get refreshed that fast. Or it could be on demand. The user is sitting in your application, they click a button or choose a menu item, generate Excel document now, which really is just generating the XML and then opening up the Excel document, refreshing it. All right, so let's go and do that. And I think you can probably guess the code is going to be pretty simple. So here we're going to go and create a cursor of sales. We're going to browse it, which you wouldn't normally do, but I want you to see what it's going to look like. And then we're going to use one line of code to generate a sales.xml file. So let's go and run that. And let's, the font size doesn't really matter because it's just going to be straightforward. We've got a region, an order date, and then we're going to denormalize the data. From the order date, we could figure out month and year, but it makes it easier for the Excel person if we give them the month number and the year number in addition to the date. And so we'll do that. So the idea is make it simple for the Excel user. Product category, a product name, the quantity, unit price, total unit cost, total price, total cost, and country. Okay, so summarize data by region, by country, by date, and so on. Okay, that's it. We create our cursor, we generate our XML document. Okay. Step 2 is to create our template document. So we're going to go and get the data from Excel. We'll create an Excel document. We'll go and get the data from our XML file, which will create a table for us. I mentioned tables earlier. How many people in here have used tables in Excel? And virtually, how about you? Anybody? It was a joke. I can't see you anyway. So tables in Excel are really cool. They're, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years old, maybe longer. I'm not sure. But tables are much better than just rows and columns of data because you can reference them by name. Instead of saying A1 or B13 or whatever, which, as you know, if you've worked with Excel for any amount of time, you know that as soon as we insert a new row or a new column, now my formulas may or may not work anymore, right? Depending on how the formula was set up, that formula may now be broken because I've moved stuff around. That's not the case with tables. You reference a table by name and by column name. So I can say raw data, total price. If I insert a bunch of columns, total price is still total price, even though it's no longer in column C, now it's in column F, doesn't matter. It's still called total price. I can reference it by name. So the location is now unimportant. Tables automatically expand. So if I change the XML data and add some more stuff to it, that new stuff gets imported automatically and the table expands automatically. New rows get added automatically without having to worry about row numbers, things like that. Formulas can apply to individual cells or to columns. If you apply a formula to a column, you get an array of values, and we'll see a bunch of examples of that in a minute. Plus, they have some nice formatting. So let's go and do that. Let's go here and let's go and create a new Excel document, and we'll call it sales report. And let's open it. And we're going to go to the data tab, choose get data from file, from XML. And it's taking it. There we go. Okay, so let's go to my folder where that file we just generated 5 minutes ago or a few minutes ago is there. Oops, import that. And I didn't point this out, but when I created that cursor, I called the cursor raw data. I did that on purpose because now it's called raw data in the XML. And when I load that, it's going to import that and into a sheet called raw data. So I did that. I mean, you could call it something else if you want to, but I called it raw data as a way of implying this is the source of data that the rest of the document is going to be based on. So now we have a table. Let's bump that font up a little bit. Okay, so we've got all the columns that were in XML, but some of the nice things about tables are that, first of all, you can format them, right? I can make it look a bunch of different ways automatically, just make it look any way you want to. You can turn on or off the header row. You can have a total row or not. You can have banded columns. You can change the format for first and last columns. You can have filter buttons to automatically filter the data, things like that. So tables are pretty cool, but beyond that, they're even more cool. Now, one thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to rename this. You notice that the table name is raw data, but I also have a tab called raw data, and that might be a little bit confusing. So let's just, I like to name my tables. Come on. Where's my home key? There we go. We'll call it table _ raw data, just to make it clear that we're talking about a table versus a sheet. Just sort of a naming thing. Okay, so now if I put a formula in here, we say equals TA, look at that, we get IntelliSense on our tables. It knows there's a table called raw data, a table _ raw data. Let me just, there we go. So, and try that again. So I get IntelliSense on my table name. So now I just hit tab, right? I don't have to type the whole thing. And if I put in a opening square bracket, now I get IntelliSense on not column numbers, but on column names, right? So I can say total price, for example. So let's go. Oh, I already was doing a formula. Sorry, I got messed up by the Zoom here. Let's close that. So let's go and put in a formula here. I'm going to say equals table raw data. Oops, I didn't hit tab. Table raw data, opening square bracket, and let's choose total price and a closing square bracket and enter. Oops. And you'll notice that it's showing, what is it saying? Sorry, I added it in the wrong place. Try that again. I put it in part of that. There we go. Okay, so you'll notice that we have an array of values because I didn't say I want a single row. I said I want from my table total price. And so we get the total price value for every value in that row. If I wanted the formula to apply to a single cell, I would say @ sign. So by saying at total price, now, oops, sorry, I need to move it over, I think, one here. Let's try it over here instead. So if I say equals table raw data at total price, now it takes that one value, the current row I was on, and applies that formula to that one row. So I can say, for example, our commissions are 10%. So times 0.1, there's a 10% commission for that. Or if I do it here, then it would apply, we'd see all those. And we're going to see arrays in more detail in a little bit. Okay. So step 3 is presenting the data. How do we want it to look? We don't want it necessarily to be just a table. We can do that in a Foxborough report. We don't need to send to Excel for that, right? We want to do some nice things. Now, maybe pivot tables, pivot charts, and use some things like slicers and timelines to do filtering, things like that. So let's go and do some examples of that. I like to make the raw data sheet the last one. So because normally the sheets, kind of go left to right. So I'm going to take the default sheet 1. I'm going to drag it over to the left here, and I'm going to right click and rename it. Even if you can't see at the back, I'm moving the sheet over and then renaming it. And we'll call it sales. Okay, so again, you probably maybe can't, well, I can zoom it up. Hang on a second here. So at the bottom here, I've got a tab called sales, and the last tab is going to be called raw data. That's the one that has the raw data. The user never really needs to look at it, but if they want to, they can. But anyway, that's where we're going to put our various things. So I'm going to go to my data here, and I'm going to insert a pivot table, and I want to put it right here and in an existing worksheet. Oops, existing worksheet, sorry. Should have shown that first. And now I want to put it right here. Okay, so oops, hang on, sorry, cancel, try that again. So this, I want to insert pivot table, existing worksheet, and I want to put it right there. Okay, so there's my pivot table. It doesn't have anything in it yet. So we're going to go and take the region and year and our total price. I want the year to go in the columns. I want the total price to be called sales. Oops. Sales. And I want it formatted as a currency. And I want this to be called year. And I want this to be called region. Boom, pivot table done. Let's do another one. Let's go back to our raw data. Let's go insert, pivot table. And again, we'll go to an existing worksheet. We'll put it below this guy right here. And we'll do something similar. We're going to, instead of using region though, we're going to say year and category and total price. And again, we'll put the year in the columns. And oops, and we'll make our total price, call that sales. And oops, sorry. And we'll make it currency. And again, we'll change this to year. And we'll change this to category. Okay, oops, category. Okay, so now I've got two pivot tables, one that shows sales by region and year, one that shows them by product and year. And we can do our usual pivot table things. I mean, your users are going to know pivot tables likely, so they can play with pivot tables to their heart's content. They can filter, yeah, I know. They can filter on them. They can do whatever they want to with them. Now, some other things we might want to do, though, is to add some ways to make it easy to filter or slice this stuff. So let's go back to this first pivot table and insert a slicer. And we want the slicer. Sorry, was there a question? Oh, sorry. Yeah. There we go. Okay. And so let's insert a slicer. And we're going to base the slicer for the first one on category. And let's move it up over here. Let's make it a little bit wider, like maybe about that wide. And we'll say it's going to have two columns, maybe a little bit taller too. Okay, so a slicer is like a filtering mechanism. So for example, if I choose beverages, now my pivot table only shows beverages or only confections or only grains and cereals. Or I can do multi-select, beverages and confections and grains and cereals. Let's do another slicer. So let's go back to our second pivot table here, and we'll go to our pivot table, or we go to insert and slicer. And this one we're going to do on region instead. And this one doesn't have to be as big because there's only 4 regions. And same deal here. I can say, here's my sales for my Eastern region, my Southern region, or I can multi-select Eastern and Southern just because I feel like it. You can have one slicer control more than one pivot table. If I just right-click this guy and choose report connections, I can say it's already connected to pivot table number 2, but I also want to connect it to pivot table number 1. And so now, whenever I change something, I'm actually controlling both pivot tables from a single slicer. So just kind of a nicer filtering mechanism than necessarily going to here and then scrolling down. You know, it's just a little bit more obvious than choosing it this way. Another thing that we can do is we can go and insert a timeline. So a timeline is also filtering, but it's filtering on dates now. So we have to pick a date column. And here's our timeline. So for example, we can set it to, let's make this a little bit wider. And we can have it display, say, in quarters. And so we want from quarter 4 to quarter 3 of 2022, or make it a little bit bigger. We just drag these and make them anyway. And this thing is controlling the pivot table automatically. And again, we can attach it to multiple pivot tables if we want to. Let's go and add a pivot chart. So let's go back to our raw data here. Oh, actually, sorry, we'll do it right off the pivot table. We'll go to our first pivot table here. And let's go and insert a pivot. Oh, we'll go to pivot table analyze and insert a pivot chart. And we want just a straightforward column chart, for example. And we can move it where we want to. Oops, sorry, move it. There we go. Move that down a bit. Let's move it over here, I guess. And one thing that's kind of cool is that the pivot chart and the pivot table are sort of now bound together. So if I change the slicer It's not only changing the pivot table, it's changing the pivot chart too. So that we go unfilter, for example, see everything. And now just, oops, turn that off. And now say just beverages and confections. Our pivot table and our pivot chart now just show beverages and well, sorry, turn that on. Beverages and confections. There we go. So our pivot chart is bound to our pivot table. And so, and again, I don't have to necessarily do this. This could be the user who's doing this, right? I gave them the data and the tools to do what they want with it, but maybe I do, maybe I don't. It's up, sort of up to you, up to the users. But what would you give them to start with? Yes, Robert.
What if the data changes, the raw data?
Great question. What if the data changes? Let's go and we'll go and do that in a couple of minutes. Okay. So, any questions about anything I've shown you so far? Yes.
One from Paul Becker asks, can you discuss the parameters you sent to Cursor to XML? Like, are they necessary for compatibility with the Excel import function?
So the question was, what about those parameters for Cursor to XML? Are they necessary for Excel? And the answer is no. The only parameters that I used were this is there so that it knows that this is a file name, not a variable name. And I think the 512 means pretty formatted or something like that. I can't remember exactly what the parameters are. But really, the parameters are unimportant. They're really not really an issue. All right. Any other questions? So now, oh, sorry. Yeah. You have to speak up a bit. So the question was, are there any special components required for Excel? The answer is no. I'm just using the out-of-the-box Excel. All right, so now let's get fancier, and let's talk about some custom formatting and maybe some mapping. So this document looks fine, but let's take one that maybe is easier for the user to use. Well, if the data changes, we'll regenerate that XML file, and all the user has to do is right-click and choose refresh. But I'll show you at the end that you can automate that too, so that they don't have to do that. It'll just, when they open it up, it'll be refreshed automatically. But that's how you do it normally, is you just right-click and choose refresh. Yes?
So we have XML as a database for that table.
XML was the source for this table. So when I right-click this, it knows that it's still connected to that file. So when I choose refresh, it's just rereading the XML file and refreshing the data. In that sense, it's not. Well, it sort of is an import. It's basically re-importing, because it could be that none of these records are there anymore. If it's say time-based data, these records may all be gone, and now it's an entirely different set of records. So it really sort of has thrown away the data and re-imported it.
Yeah, so if we remove the XML, it still runs.
If we remove the XML, it will still run, but you can no longer refresh it.
And the location of XML?
We're going to talk about that at the end, because that is an important point. The question was, what about the location of the XML? We're going to talk about that at the end, because that is important. Okay, so let's bump this. Well, we don't really have to look at this page. Let's go back to the daily page here first, and I think I've already got it bumped up. Okay, so this is kind of a nice looking document, but it has some ease of use features. For example, I don't have to filter on region. I don't have to, I can just choose from a drop down list of values, region values, like I want the Western region, or I can put in a starting date. And what this shows is this shows daily sales for 1 week at a time. This one shows monthly sales 1 month at a time. And in addition to choosing the region, I can also choose a drop down list of months, and I can choose a drop-down list of years. So where did all this stuff come from? Well, let's go and dig in and see where this came from. So region, this is, I don't know if you've ever used this before, but on the data tab is data validation. And data validation is kind of like what you might expect. It allows you to say, well, it has to be numeric value. It has to be between 1 and 10. But one of the data validations is list. And that means give me a list of values, and that's what should be displayed instead. And what the list of values is this set right here. Now, where did that come from? Well, let's go and take a look. So here, I put in a formula, this formula right here, which is unique table data region. So table data region would give me an array of all of the regions, except I use the unique function on it, which means I only see the unique values in region. Okay, and I could sort them if I wanted to. They're not sorted, but I could sort them alphabetically as well. So back to here. So I said data validation. I want this to be a list, and the source of the list is right here. And so now it knows that this drop-down list has those values that the user can choose from. So now let's take a look at the rest of the formulas here. This formula is just whatever the user typed in for a starting date. This is that date plus 1, this is that date plus 1, and so on. This is the weekday function applied to this date value, so it shows the day. This is also a unique function. So give us the table raw data category, but unique it and display them here. So I didn't type those values out. They're just automatically pulled from the data. This is the sum ifs function, which is a very cool function. It says, I want to sum up the total price from raw data, but using the following criteria. The region has to be equal to whatever's in B1. The order date has to be whatever in B4. The category has to be whatever in A8. Okay? So it sums those things, it sums up the total price, all of the total price values from our table, but only for the Western region for December 1st in dairy products. That's what that cell is. Then I simply fill right and fill down. And because I was smart about where I use the dollar signs, remember a dollar sign in Excel means absolute and a no dollar sign means relative. So by putting the dollar signs in the appropriate spot, this one is always relative. This one here is relative for the row. So as I move over, it's this value I want, this value, I want this value. As I move down, I want this value, or I want this value. So by putting dollar signs in the appropriate places, I said some things are absolute, some things are relative. So I just fill right, fill down, done, right? Now we go on to the next one. Exact same thing, except now we're summing up total costs. So this one's showing our revenue. This one is showing our expenses. It's just summing up the total cost column. Formulas are the same. This is even simpler. This says revenue minus expenses. And this one is just revenue minus expenses, but as a percentage, except I'm using the if error function because of divide by 0. If I didn't use it and sales were 0, I get, that hashtag div 0 error message. I don't want to see that. So by using the if error function, I say display a 0 if the sales is, if the sales is 0, then display a 0. So the next one, the monthly, is pretty much exactly the same, just slight additional wrinkles. We have a starting month, and so this is the month numeric value of the month, and this is the year. Except when we hit January, so this is just same as this is the same across. Except when I hit January, I'm actually incrementing the year, so it checks to see if my month number is 1. Add 1 to the previous year. So that's why we go from December of 2021 to January of 2022. The formulas down here are almost the same. There's just one additional criteria. The year has to be whatever this year is. So the region has to be this, the month has to be this, the year has to be this, the product category has to be this. That's the sum of the total price. This is the sum of the total cost, and so on. Okay? And the last one is a map. I did a map just by going to insert. I created this array first. I said equals table data country, but I want to unique it, and then I want to sort on it. So we have a unique sorted list of countries. And here I'm using that same sum ifs function again. Sum up total price for the country equals whatever this is. Then I simply select this table, insert a map, and it creates a map for me. Then I move it where I want to and resize it, I'm done. And if you want to do a 3D map, you can do a 3D map. I'm not going to do one here, but here's what a 3D map could look like. And this is like a full globe. You can spin it, you can rotate it in any direction, and the size of the dot is the size of the sales for that country. All right, we are pretty much out of time. So, yeah, we are out of time. So I'm going to wind up and show you one more thing, wind up, and then we'll go into our Q&A session. Okay, so the question that Robert asked was, what about the path to the data? The problem is that the path to the XML is hard-coded. So because I chose from d:\Doug's files / whatever as the XML file, that is hard-coded into the document, which is no good because now I'm going to send it to my customer and they're not going to drop it into a folder called d:\Doug's files, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to change that. So in this cell here, I have a formula. I'm not going to explain what it is, but it's named file path, and it gives us the path that this Excel document is located in. Then we go to our data and we go to edit the query. And sorry, I'm running over time, so I'm going to go really fast here. You go to the advanced editor and you add one line of code here that says, go to that file path object, read it in, and then here's where the path was hard-coded. This said d:\Doug's files. I simply changed it to be file path and sales.xml. So now it simply expects that the XML file and the XLS file are in the same folder, whatever that folder may be. I'm not going to take a question now because I'm out of time. So I'm going to go to the Q&A session, and then we can take questions there. Okay. So that's all I'm going to show you for now. Okay. So let's wind up. Modern applications should have Excel export. I mean, it's just so easy to do. There's no reason not to have Excel export in your applications. But don't just output boring lists. We can create nice looking documents with, nice big headers and bold fonts and things like that. You can even make the users do the work for you. You give them the data, have them find somebody in their company who knows Excel, or they can hire a consultant, or maybe you can do it. But either way, somebody who has a lot of knowledge of Excel can make really attractive, useful, powerful documents. All right. So let's call it a day, and then we'll go right into the Q&A session. So we'll bring the online people in. So thank you very much for listening to me for the last hour and a bit. Please fill out your evaluations. The link is online. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to